Bringing people and communities together on seclosounds.org.
Your listening station.
This week's show features the Science Museum in London. Find out where you should go by listening to the John Guinn Travel Show on seclosounds.org. Hello and welcome to the John Guinn Travel Show on seclosounds.org. This week's show I did plan to talk about how to use the internet to book travel because I'm doing a speech in a couple of weeks and I've not done it for a while. I wanted to practice on you, dear listener. You would have learned stuff. It wouldn't have been just me going on and on and on. I promise you would have learned something. But I've got a cold, as you can probably tell by my voice, and I thought the last thing you need is me to be speaking in my normal monotone, but with the man flu hint in the background. So I'm revisiting a visit I paid to the Science Museum down in London. I actually paid 2 visits to the Science Museum. The first time the interview went really well, it was really good. Got back to the studio and I found out that my recorder, the preamplifier, had broken, so it was completely unusable. So I had to go back down the following week to do it all over again. And of course it wasn't quite as good. But at least me and Anthony Richards, who's the learning manager at the Science Museum, knew how good the first one was. So that's good enough, I guess. Of course, at the end of the show there's going to be some travel news as well. And for a change, I'm going to have some good news on the visa front for visiting a country. But first, let's get on to hearing about why we should visit the Science Museum when I chat to Anthony Richards, who's the learning manager even at the museum. Anthony, what is the Science Museum and how did it come about?
The Science Museum is one of the national museums in Britain, one of our great achievements, I think, as a society. So you have places like the National History Museum and the Science Museum, National Maritime Museum, all of those ones. And we're one of the ones located in South Kensington, so people might remember coming here as a child on Exhibition Road. And it comes really from the Great Exhibition, was this huge exhibition in 1851, and a lot of the sort of enthusiasm and a lot of the collections for those museums sort of originated from that time. So it goes back, I suppose, to around about 1851.
Are any of the original exhibits from 1851 still on show?
They are, yeah. What's interesting about this museum is, like a lot of big museums, is most of the stuff is in storage, and people don't really think of that. So about I suppose 90% or so is in storage, and a lot of that is the original from the original sort of source collections. But there are still some things on show which were very important, particularly I suppose as you come in the Industrial Revolution. There's some very, very important engines like the Bolton and Watt engine and the Newcomb engine as you come in to the main entrance. So yeah, there are some on show still.
Where do you store your stuff? It must take up a lot of space.
You can't believe it. Well, there's a huge post office building in Olympia, which was originally the National Savings Bank. People might know it if they live around there. It's called Blythe Road. It's the most amazing building. And in there, we've got storage facilities for the V&A, the British Museum, and the Science Museum. So we've got a lot of our medical stuff in there. I've been in there, and you wander around and open these doors that used to be full of clerks, I suppose, doing banks and things. And there's a room full of dentist chairs, there's a room full of skulls. It's sort of a spooky place in a way, but that's one of our storage facilities. But then the other really, really big one is in the West Country, down in Wroughton near Swindon, where we've got a World War II aircraft hangar. Well, not a hangar, it's an airfield with 5 or so hangars on it, and they are jam-packed full of the most astonishing stuff, from planes to vehicles that travelled to the polar caps, to the Rolling Stones' private jet, all sorts of different things. Oh, and the lawnmower collection, that's what the lawnmower collection is. So, it's masses and masses of space needed for all these things once you've acquired them for the nation, really.
So if somebody's interested in lawnmowers, could they apply to go and have a look at them?
If they wanted to, and yes, they could, yeah. The thing about a national collection is that it's not actually owned by me or any of my colleagues. We look after it for the nation. We look after it in perpetuity, we say, and it's actually the people of Britain who own all of these things. And yeah, you can ring up and ask to see objects or collections if they are in storage, yeah.
trying to think why they would keep the Rolling Stones private jet.
There's a reason behind everything, John.
Okay.
There's a reason why everything is collected, and I don't know offhand. It must be a particular type, or it was donated. I don't know, but it's we don't take everything that's offered to us. But if it's of significance, then we would take it, and yeah, there'll be a story. That's the thing about objects in museums. They tell a story of a time and of how it was made and what it was for. So yeah.
I keep saying museum for the science museum, but is there a pet name for it?
No, I don't think I've ever heard a pet name for the museum. I mean, what I've heard after working here for a long time is people refer to it as the museum where you can do things, the place where you can fiddle around with things, the room where the stuff works. So I've heard that sort of used before. But no, I don't think we've got an actual pet name. We all just call it the museum, actually. Just the museum. It becomes part of your everyday life. You know, people walk through office blocks and through open plan offices, but we walk through, you know, the nation's collection of historical scientific achievement. It's an amazing privilege, really, to do that.
There's a lot of history here. The building's quite old. Is it haunted? Are there any ghosts?
Yeah, the ghost of my former self, perhaps, as a schoolboy. It isn't, I don't think. But what we do have, strangely, you should mention that, because we have sleepovers for young kids. So from about 7 to 14, if you're that age, once a month we hire it out, and about 400 kids sleep overnight here. And they come along with their sleeping bags and their toothbrushes and their teddies. And one of the things that they assume, of course, is once the lights go out, that it's going to be haunted by the ghost of scientists or evil spirits. So we play on that sometimes with a little bit of storytelling to add to the educational sort of workshops that they get. But no, I've yet to see any spectres in the last 25 years.
The sleepover sounds fun. I'm just a little bit out of the age range now to do that.
Just a bit, yeah.
It's been really interesting when I was a kid.
Well, we've run them for 20 years. So what's really amazing for me, having worked on a lot of those, and they're very, very exciting, energising nights, is that there are some people now that came on them when they were younger, 7 to 12, let's say, and ended up working here. So one of my colleagues, Shana, who works as a manager here, came on a science night when she was about 8, and I was working that night, which is really weird. So yeah, it does work like that sometimes. We give experiences here that are intended so that you never forget them, and I think that's certainly true of the science night. You wouldn't have forgotten it, I don't think.
No. It's not. It's something they wouldn't have forgotten. It's not the fact she couldn't find a way out since she was 8 and now.
They said that. There's a couple of people, when I first joined here, there were a couple of people that had been here what I thought was an enormous length of time, 30 or 40 years, and that was the joke about them, that they came as schoolboys in the 1950s and just couldn't get out. But no, it's once you've started to work here, it's almost like an addictive place to work, really.
Gary Fitz here, every Monday, 10 o'clock.
Coming up, we've got Eric and Ernie.
Join me here on Seclo Sounds.
In your smile.
It's from 1975. Eric and Ernie were 4.
Gary, it's not Eric and Ernie, it's Earl and Ernie, the Cape Brothers, Union Man.
Oh, I see.
Gary Fitz here, every Monday, 10 o'clock.
Earl and Ernie. Checking it out before you check in on the John Guinn Travel Show on seclosounds.org. Just to remind you, so I get a little bit of sympathy, I have man flu this week when I'm recording the show. So there's going to be not much talking about me. And what I do talk about is probably going to go, I've got man flu. But anyway, the guest this week is Anthony Richards, the learning manager at the Science Museum. We're now going to find out what the goal of the museum is and how it's changed since it first opened. Has the main aim of the museum changed since day one? And if there's been changes in the way this place operates, when was the last major change?
Yeah, I think museums always change, and they reflect lots of different influence, really, from the government, because we're sort of still linked to the government, of course, but also changes in educational practice and also what you think a museum is for. I mean, I think originally it was probably about informing the public, or thinking that there was a gap in the public's knowledge of a certain area, so that the museums provided that. Whereas now the thought is much more of a two-way conversation between the public science culture and the museum about what we show and how we portray it. So in something like climate science or climate change, you would portray that quite sensitively, knowing how people feel about it. So certainly the changes now are about knowing your audience better and also attracting a much wider sort of cross-section of the public. I think museums, if you go back to when they first started and in the early 20th century, were much more elitist in what they put on show, but also who came through the door. And in the last 20 years, there's been a real push to get it a lot broader than that. No, not just children, but adults that wouldn't be experts, so much more people that, would be more of a lay person, if you like. So that's the biggest change, I would say. And I think for the future, we've become very well known as a place for children, including the sleepovers and all these other things, but we're now looking towards attracting more adults, and that's young adults who might not visit us, 18 to 30 perhaps, but also older people, retired people that also might think that it's full of kids and to put things on for them. So again, museums change. They're never the same organisation. They might have the same objects, they might have some of the same buildings, but how they show them and how they, what we usually say is engage with the audience, definitely changes, yeah.
On the way up to your office, we had to go through past a load of people's heaving here today. So how many visitors do you get each year?
We just broke records actually this year, so it's now May, isn't it? So we just had our yearly figures from April, and we did 3.3 million visitors last year, which is the most ever for this museum. And our school figures, so the number of people in school parties, also broke all records. So I think that's now up to 450,000, which is the most visited in the country. Hence why it was so busy today. During school terms, we get a lot of booked educational groups, and that's gone through the roof in the last 2 years just because of what we put on for them, really. So we might have performances, drama characters, shows, storytellings, all sorts of different events, so that it's not just a visit where you just come in and look around. We structure it very, very carefully so that teachers and pupils can get a lot out of a 2.5, 3 hour visit. That's part of what the job of being in learning or education is, really.
If you believe the popular press, you think that you're only really having male visitors. Is that the case?
When I started work here, it was definitely 70% to 30% male to female. And I remember that on our visitor exit figures, but it also reflected in the workforce as well. It was a very much sort of a academic club feel to a lot of the staff here. That has completely changed. So a lot of people in this unit, which is the educational learning unit, are female, but also the visitors now, it's gone 50-50, and I think it's gone the other way. I think it might be more 55 to 45 female to male, and you see that in on the floor, but also who goes to our programming and who we choose to represent scientists on the floor as well. And that's all part of an important movement, because it could have stayed a very, very male preserve. If you imagine our collection, industry, engineering, medicine, these are usually sort of dominated by male figures. So yeah, we work hard to try and alter that perception.
I read on your website that 99% of those surveyed said that their visit was good value for money. So how much does it cost to come?
Well, very good value for money because it's free. National museums are still free, and long may that continue. So it's, again, a political decision from the government, but it's free to come in. We have secondary charges for some of the exhibitions, so we might have temporary exhibitions or blockbuster exhibitions or the IMAX or the simulators. Those kind of things are secondary charge, but it is free for schools and free for the general public.
There's a lot here.
There's a lot here, indeed.
So how is the museum divided up? I mean, what's the difference between the hall and the floor?
It's a very difficult thing to explain to people. In fact, we look at our sort of complaints and our feedback very carefully, and it's the number one feedback, which is they can't really find their way around very easily. And there's no real quick answer to that. It's a huge building with 20,000 things in it, let alone pieces of art, interactive hands-on galleries, performances. All of those different things coexist in the museum. And that's because the audience is such a broad audience, but also their needs are so different. We've got somebody who might be 30, 40, 50, you've got a 7-year-old, a family groups, kids with special needs. This is an enormous breadth, so you need to put lots of different types of things on for all of those people. And the programme of events and the exhibitions reflect those. So there's no kind of narrative from exhibition to exhibition. the floors and the